the weekly Industry Angel podcast hears from business leaders and entrepreneurs who share their stories and that all-important light bulb moment. This can inspire us all and maybe scratch that itch and kickstart that idea that keeps you awake at night. Hi, this is Ian Farrer. Today we have Dinah Bennett, OBE. Dinah is an author, speaker and founder of the international consultancy ICE. Thanks for joining us, Dinah.
It's a pleasure, Ian.
Now, Dinah, you're a modest lady, so I'm going to start with telling our listeners that you awarded your OBE for services to women's entrepreneurship and one of the first women to be honoured with the Queen's Award for Achievement in Enterprise Promotion.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, that's a fantastic honour, Dinah. Your family must be very proud.
Oh, thank you. Yes, well, I was really very chuffed to actually get that for doing something that I'm very passionate about. So no, I was delighted, but really I felt that it should have gone to an awful lot of other people that I work with as well. But hey,
well, that's nice, and I'm sure it was a great memory. Now, Dinah, we first met. I think it was in Beijing Airport, actually, en route to Qingdao. And if you remember, we were on a trade mission to China, and we agreed to catch up later on the week in Shanghai. Now, we met along the Bund, if you remember, with a couple of other guys.
That's a great trip.
Now, for our listeners, the Bund is in an area of Shanghai. It's situated along the riverside. It's got many beautiful buildings of European influence. And we met in a nice restaurant. But mainly what sticks in my mind, Dinah, is the fact we had to perform a sharp exit out of that restaurant that night. You might remember the manager was trying to get one of our friends out, but it was almost Big Trouble in Little China.
That was a very good trip, though.
It was indeed, but that's a nice segue really into what I'd like to chat with you today. Your passport must be thick as a Bible, Dinah. There's a great section on your website, actually, that has an embedded map. And there's a pain in many of the projects you've completed globally, and it's a lot. So if we could dive straight in, Dinah, and really just let us know how ICE all started.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I started off my whole career really in academia, working around the concept of enterprise and entrepreneurship, helping a variety of individuals and organisations become more entrepreneurial. And within that, obviously, I did a lot of work looking at supporting women to start businesses. And I thought I'd then sort of take the opportunity to then go wider and take it out of the university and practice in a whole host of different contexts. So ICE basically helps financial, academic and a whole range of government and commercial institutions to achieve their sort of entrepreneurial ambition by a whole host of different ways, by getting closer to the small business community, by becoming more enterprise, but also, I think, to introduce effective enterprise strategies and policies within their institution.
Now, Dinah, it might be worth telling our listeners what ICE stands for.
It stands for International Consultants, Entrepreneurship and Enterprise. It's a bit of a mouthful, which is why everyone just knows that as ICE.
Well, I'm glad you said. That's why I asked you to say it, to be honest. Now, Dinah, do you want to tell us maybe about some of the projects that you're kind of most proud of, or maybe that sticks out in your mind?
I'm proud of all the projects that I do, and I have the benefit and privilege of working with a range of really different people in different contexts. I mean, you mentioned China, which is where we first met. From that trade mission that we were on with UKTI, I came into contact with a really interesting private sector organisation who work with family businesses in China. And that's really interesting because I do a lot of work with family businesses around the world. And China at that time, with its one-child policy, had a unique problem that family businesses could only be passed on to one child. But the problem was, only having one child, that child didn't want to go into the business. They didn't want to create wealth. They wanted to consume the wealth that was created by the first generation. So we do a lot of work with Chinese family businesses, but also the young people, to help them think about the future and not just spending wealth, but actually, creating wealth, and other things as well. I work with governments, as I said, do a lot of work with financial institutions, banks. For the last 2 years, I've been working a lot of the time in Zambia and Kenya, working with a range of financial institutions to help them understand their small business clients more effectively. I mean, as we know, the whole world is waking up to the fact that small is beautiful. And we talk about small businesses being the engines and backbones of economies. But as you can imagine, banks are very, very corporate enterprises, and they look at the world through a very corporate lens. So my work with my colleagues is to actually help these bankers see the world from the other side of the desk. They can actually service their small business clients more effectively and develop more effective working relationships with them. And as I say, my passion is very much around women's entrepreneurship. This came about some research that I did many years ago. And my whole research sample, bar one, they were men. And I was thinking, well, where are the women here? So I started doing a little bit of digging to find out what was going on, to look at why we didn't see more women in business. And there were a whole range of factors around that. So I started focusing and researching and creating different initiatives to actually support more women in business, which I started off mainly in the Northeast region, but that whole project is now global. And I do a lot of work internationally looking at getting more women into the business, because all governments now recognise that if you actually get more women economically empowered, it's really good for GDP. So it's a really good thing to do. So that's great. So I hope that's a flavour of some of the things that I do in different contexts.
And how do these things sort of naturally progress from one project to another? You mentioned there that you're in China, and I guess you maybe might have fell into that project. How do these sort of lead into each other?
Fell in? That was very strategic. As you know from that trip, Ian. How do I feel? Well, a lot of my work is developed through relationships. So it could be old clients of mine, old colleagues. I spent many years teaching on MBA programs in different institutions at Durham University, Warwick University. I'm a visiting lecturer at universities in South Africa and France. So my old students would come to me saying, we'd like you to work with us, which is great. So when I started working for myself, it was completely different, obviously, from working from in an academic institution. I work very closely with someone who's great at social media. And this woman, Joan Graham, she's encouraged me to write blogs, to put out e-zines every few months. And I'm amazed at how much work is generated from people reading the blogs that I write and the e-zines that I put out. So it's a mixture of relationships, but also putting out, blogs, just telling people what I do or things that interest me. But I say the key thing is very much around the relationships that I've developed, that people will come back or, refer me on to others.
Really interesting point you made there, Dinah, about the blogging side of it. And I mean, I love to blog as well, but it's the content. I think you write great content, and it's very now. There's a lot of content in there that people are really starting to look into, especially the women in work and the women in the boardroom, that kind of thing. I'm really interested, Dinah, in some of the areas you've been in, especially in the developing countries. I've spent a bit of time in India and obviously China, and the world is changing so dramatically now that kind of new middle class is coming up, and their drivers are totally changing. Is it all about wealth? Do you find there's a sort of a challenge there for you to get them back into thinking more of entrepreneurship?
Well, the interesting thing is, as you said, the world is changing so much, and we are living and have been living in what people are calling the new normal, times of great uncertainty. For many years, I still work with undergraduates and postgraduates. There's no such thing as a job for life anymore. And what I find now is that if we can educate adults, young people, to think more creatively, to spot opportunities, to really understand this environment and the world of uncertainty that they're living in, they're the ones that are going to survive and thrive. I think the people with the mindset of there is always going to be a job there for me are the ones that are going to struggle, because, you've just said it yourself, things are changing drastically, and it's not just in our environment, it's across the world. Look at people in the oil sector, they've been saying to me, they're so uncertain, they would go from job to job quite happily without thinking about it. Now I'm hearing they're going to be made redundant, that they don't see anything on the horizon. So for me, there's an opportunity for these people to start thinking about, okay, so what is it I can do next with the skills and experience that I've got? Some people could look at it in a really, really negative way, saying, oh no, this is just awful. But other people can then take this as an opportunity to maybe, put their skills to a different use.
Do you find it in the UK that entrepreneurship is starting to dwindle compared to other countries, or are we still strong in that area?
No, I think we are incredibly strong in that area. But I think one of the things that I try to do is take away, people assume that entrepreneurship is just about starting a business. It's not. That's one of the biggest problems that we have, particularly in academia, that entrepreneurship is seen merely in the domain of the business school. It's not at all. It's not merely about starting a business. That's just one element. Entrepreneurship can be located in any context. I found entrepreneurs in the civil service. I found entrepreneurial people in banks. So, I found entrepreneurial English literature students, entrepreneurial geography students who would like to put their skills to use, but not necessarily running a business, just to think more creatively as to what they can do in their own context. So no, it's not dwindling. I think it's how we actually embrace it and see it in a far more wider context.
Can we just talk about some of the work you've been doing in the African countries? How is it over there?
Sub-Saharan Africa, I love it. I mean, I've spent many, many years there, different contracts. In fact, I started off my career working in Sudan. And, all the people I work, they're incredibly entrepreneurial. And often, people talk about push-pull factors as to why you actually go into entrepreneurship. And, one of the push factors are just sort of getting yourself out of poverty. There is a need there. So people have to start thinking creatively as to what they can do just to lift themselves out of poverty. So, yeah, again, I've had the privilege of working with some amazing entrepreneurial people. I've just finished a study, actually, in Kenya, based on a study that I did. It was called The Hallmarks for Successful Business here, which I did in partnership with a colleague called David Hall many years ago, looking at what made really successful small businesses, because we were trying to challenge, again, that corporate myth that, all of the different support providers and banks were treating small businesses like mini corporates, which can be really dangerous, actually. So that research was really successful, and it developed into some BBC TV programs, books, training programs. And we transposed that into the Kenyan economy, looking at what made successful growth businesses in Kenya and how do they actually finance themselves. And it was absolutely fascinating. I was so lucky to come into contact with 29 really interesting, diverse businesses there, and really get under the skin of these businesses by spending hours and hours talking over a period of a year to the owner managers about their motivations for starting, how they grew, some of the challenges they faced. So no, my work there is fascinating, and again, feel very privileged to interact with these people.
Could you just give us an idea of what some of those small businesses look like? What kind of industries they're working in?
Just similar industries to here. They could be macadamia nut producers, and they supply them to the airlines. One is a plastic bag manufacturer and retailer. This particular guy, Peter Barugu, he started off as a hawker, selling plastic bags in one of the biggest slums in East Africa. It's amazing. Now he employs 123 people and has his own factory. And I find this man completely inspirational, whenever I meet him. And his whole philosophy, which I subscribe to, is about treating people really well, treating his staff really well. But what he used to do was buy plastic bags in the morning on credit, go and sell them throughout the day, then pay back the supplier, and he built his business from that. So from a hawker to 100-odd staff in a factory, pretty amazing, actually.
That's a fantastic story. And in terms of some of the other interests, I need to know more, Dinah. Tell me more.
Well, there are people that will have petrol station franchises. They will run bus companies. They build them up. A whole range of service sector companies as well, offering different services, design, financial services. So just sort of businesses that we'd get in any other context, you will see developing there. But again, you'll see them run multiple businesses as well. And again, that's not uncommon here. But sometimes when we talk about issues around access to finance, property is always seen and taken as collateral by banks. So we'd see almost every business set up some sort of retail property company just to actually have that as collateral for the bank, which is interesting.
I touched upon India earlier on there, Dinah, and my parents actually lived half the year over there. So when I've ever visited them, I see a change, a real change every 6 months, every year, lots of development, hotels and apartments. Do you see such a change, when you go to these countries and then, a few months goes by and then, big change in the landscape?
Huge changes. But the thing that saddens me is that it's often, it's these big conglomerates that are, building all these buildings. And I just wonder what benefit that has to the person on the street. Obviously, my passion is sort of like, looking at businesses that really actually help people and their families. Yes, I see massive change wherever I go, which is in one sense very, very positive. But India is a fascinating country, isn't it?
It is indeed. And have you done much work over there, Dinah?
I have. I had the pleasure years ago of going to work with a woman who's now a close colleague of mine, Smita Premchanda, and she did a lot of work with peer lending groups for women in one of the poorest parts of India, Karnataka. And at the time that I worked with her, she'd actually empowered over 40,000 women through peer lending schemes. And that was just from savings groups. And the women would meet on a weekly basis and just save 5, 10 rupees at a time. And then I went round visiting some of the almost social enterprises that were set up by some of these groups of women, So sort of like little mini milk companies, wig making, rug making. It was absolutely fantastic. And, that's to me to actually pull some of these women and their families out of poverty. The impact that project has, it's still going actually, is absolutely phenomenal. And as I say, Smita Premchanda is an amazing woman, and her organisation, Sampark, is to be applauded. It's quite fascinating.
And how did they take to you, Dinah, when they first see you? Are they a bit sort of reluctant to get involved, or are they really open arms to carry you in and take your knowledge forward?
Oh, absolutely. No, they're so welcoming and like really entrepreneurial people. Actually, they just want to learn. They will lap anything up. Books, new knowledge, learning. It's great. And of course, I learn a lot from them in the process, which I then put back into my teaching and other work in different contexts.
I can imagine some of the learning you do is probably later on, maybe getting back home and just reflecting on some of the experiences you've had. Do you write when you're there? Do you take a little notebook and scribble away some of the thoughts and memories, or?
I have a camera and I take many, many photographs, which I'll then use. And in fact, my website, some of it, the photographs that I took from Karnataka when I was out with Smita, I feature. So no, I do of course take notes, and I take lots of photographs, just to jog my memory and use them in my blogs and different articles and in teaching as well.
Do you think there's a book in there, Dinah?
Oh, I don't know. I'm so lazy about book writing books. Oral history and passing things on through my training and teaching, I think, is easier. Maybe that's because I'm so lazy to put my head to that.
I mean, it's a passion of mine as well to sort of listen to some of these stories from developing countries and how entrepreneurial they can be. And a book would be awesome. Do it.
Okay, I might take up that challenge, but there are other people that are churning out these things brilliantly. I always believe in let people stick to what they're really good at, and if they're really good at putting out books, let them do it, and I can read them.
What do some of these countries excel in that we don't?
Well, I'd say in being enterprising, finding new ways of doing things, based on their own context and experience. I find it's really interesting that you can go to different countries and see something there that really works, that could actually work in your own context as well, transposing different ideas into different places. And I know you're going to ask me for lots of examples, and right now I can't think of a single one, but...
Well, what I've noticed is they're so industrious. Where we would probably throw something away or just quit, they'll put time and effort into it. And some of the things I've seen, sort of really inventions, for want of a better word, they're just fantastic, some of the stuff they get into.
I think it's really this throwaway economy in society that we live in. I find it abhorrent, actually. I find it absolutely appalling. It shouldn't be, because, it just it has a knock-on effect in so many different respects, our attitude, our values to things, that we can, if it breaks, we just throw it. But that has a knock-on effect to, lots of things, not least landfill.
It does indeed, and I can't bring myself to do it, and much to my wife's horror, my garage is just full. But I think it stems from my parents, that they were very industrious. My father would take things to bits and he would really try his hardest to fix it. Whereas now, you look into someone's bottom drawer and there's bunches of mobile phones and digital cameras, and it's technology that breaks my heart. There's so much time and effort gone into it, and now it's just sat there doing nothing.
Well, mobile phones can be recycled to a good charity.
Indeed they can. And is that something that you've experienced when you've been in lakes of Africa?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Everything. Whenever I travel, I take things over. A good friend of mine supports an orphanage in Kenya. So my sister sends me out with all my niece's clothes, which I take out on every trip. I think if you've got a luggage allowance, one has to use it. That's my philosophy for traveling. In Zambia, we do some fundraising for a fantastic charity that I didn't even know what this was. Hippotherapy for children with really, really special learning needs. And they've trained up Zambian riders to actually put these children on horses. And the impact of being on these horses is just phenomenal. The parents would say of these children, they'd never raised their heads before. And once they actually spend some time on the horses in this hippotherapy, they're almost like different children. So it's fantastic, fantastic, the work that's done in these places.
That's a beautiful story. So you're taking things over there. Is there anything that you bring back?
Oh, I bring lots of things back. Again, one has to use one's luggage allowance. No, I love different artifacts. I mean, if you ever visited my home, you'll see I'm surrounded artifacts from all the places that I've worked. I mean, I love all the different beads, materials, textiles, wooden things, that one sees in different places. I love it. But obviously, the most important thing I bring back are the sort of my memories and the learning that I've got from these countries and working with these different people.
For sure, and I'm really passionate about sharing those memories, Dinah. Now, you won't do a book, so how do you go about sharing those memories?
Well, I talk to people like you, Ian, and do podcasts. But as I say, I'm always standing up in front of, groups for either training or teaching or presentations, and these stories come out then. And encouraging others to actually go out and visit different places as well and do different things.
Now let's hear from our sponsors. Jump over to Facebook and search for Northeast Happening. These are the guys that take social media to the next level. If you'd like to reach a huge target audience, be sure to like their page and ask how they can make your social media happen. Now, back to Dinah Bennett. So where could we find you, Dinah, if we wanted to look into some of the work that you've done?
Well, I've recently taken to Twitter. My hashtag is @consult_ice. I have a website, which is consult-ice.com, and a LinkedIn page under Dinah Bennett. So, I love people getting in touch. And again, social media is so fantastic for that, isn't it?
It certainly is. I'm a big fan of Twitter. Even just not so much posting, but just reading. Being able to learn, being able to put a search term in and get the information just immediately is fantastic. But what I'll do, Dinah, I'll make sure that we put the show notes up and we'll link you all to your various social media links. Just in terms of books, Dinah, could you recommend something to our listeners?
Recommend? Oh, the list is too long. I think I've read a lot by Malcolm Gladwell. I love his work, and I actually was lucky enough to see him when he came to Newcastle a few years ago. And Jim Collins, Built to Last, Good to Great. But also, it's not just about reading. Whenever I get the opportunity, I'd like to go and hear people speak as well. And I think TED Talks are fantastic. And the Harvard Business Review videos, which are all free online. And I think if people don't take the opportunity to look up some of the TED Talks, I think it is a lost opportunity, actually.
And how do you go about listening to them, Dinah? Do you listen to them in your car via podcast or
on podcast? Obviously, when you're traveling, air trips are really useful for that. But I just download them on the iPad or the iPhone and listen to them when I've got travel time. So it's great. But I do recommend TED Talks. They are just fantastic.
They are. I'm a huge fan, and my iPhone keeps saying that there's no storage left because I've got such a huge backlog of things to listen to. I walk around the house, or I'm washing cars, or gardening. There's a phone sticking out of my top pocket, and the other earphones are plugged in, constantly hammering podcasts into my brain because there's just so much out there, but just so little time. And I was talking to a guy yesterday about productivity, and it's something that I really need to work on and become more productive. There's not enough hours in the day to listen to all this great material.
No, that's true. And I mean, so Ken Robinson, he talks a lot about education, and obviously that's one of the fields that I'm in. And it really concerns me, the education that we're giving to young people these days. We're not teaching them to, you know, open up and spot opportunities and be creative. You know, it's all this learning by rote in a lot of places, you know, and a lot of countries as well, even in our own, I would argue. And he talks an awful lot of sense. And I think education, not just for young people, is so important.
It is indeed. It's a topic on its own. I'm a school governor with my children's school, and it's something I'm really passionate about. And I spend many an hour, you know, looking through the various notes and policies. And it's a show on its own, that one, Dinah.
Absolutely, I totally agree. But education, in many respects, I mean, I do a lot of work at another company I'm involved in, Wise Development, and education for young girls. You know, the impact that has is just absolutely phenomenal. You know, it changes courses of lives. It's very, very important.
It does, catches them young, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Dinah, we'll just leave it with one last nugget. Is there any little piece of advice that really sits in your brain that you could share with us?
You know, I'm a people person. I, you know, do a lot around relationship management, and I feel that, you know, this world isn't made up of buildings and institutions and organisations. It's the people within them. And I do believe that, you know, engaging those people is one of the most important things that one can do, and respect them depending on what their background or context is. So to me, it's about putting people first. That's my nugget.
Well, that's a fantastic place to leave it, Dinah, and it's been absolutely brilliant. So I must thank you for your time, and hopefully catch up with you soon. Thanks, Dinah.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks, Ian.
That was Dinah Bennett, OBE. I found that fascinating. I hope you did too. You can hear just how passionate Dinah is about coaching and certainly learning from some of the fantastic organisations she's had the privilege to work with, and just how that's strengthened and helped shape her value proposition. If you want to know more about Dinah's work, you can check out the show notes over at industryangel.com. So until next time, thanks for listening.